Welcome to my show. A guest here. His name is Bob Ginsberg. Mr. Bob, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you very much, Mr. Bob. Firstly, you are the founder of Forever Family Foundation. Can you please, Mr. Bob, discuss more about yourself and how you are doing currently now, Mr. Bob?
Well, my life now is very different than it was 22 years ago.
Mm.
Uh, I'd say, back then I was a left brain thinker, logical thinker. The notion that we survived our physical death to me was fantasy, because, I thought that we were our brains, and when our brains would know more, we would know more. And then I had, personal tragedy in my life, where my son and my daughter were in a car accident. My daughter didn't survive, and my son, had very serious brain injuries. Um, and then I started searching, afterwards because I wanted to know if there was any credible evidence, from medical doctors and scientists, PhDs, that our consciousness, our mind, our soul, whatever you want to call it, continues after the body is no more. And I started studying and meeting with researchers that studied the mind, and I learned about evidence starting from telepathy and ESP, and then distant healing, and then near-death experiences, and reincarnation, and after-death communication, and mediumship, and deathbed visions, and the whole gamut. And I was kind of I was amazed. The more I read, the more I learned. There was so much information and so much evidence out there that the mainstream public mostly was unaware of. The foundation we started at the beginning just as a safe place where people could gather. We used to hold these discussion groups and talk about some of these things without the fear of being labeled or judged, which happens. We're taught in this society that anything that we can't perceive with our known physical senses doesn't exist. But which is kind of crazy, because yet there's all sorts of things that we can't see. Gravity, we can't see,
Yes.
electromagnetic waves and so forth, and yet scientists say they exist. So there's a little disparity in the way scientists look at that. But yeah, I mean, that's now where the foundation, has 15,000 members in 76 countries, and the people have a thirst for this kind of knowledge. Also today, especially looking at world events, people are questioning their own mortality for the first time. What happens? Is it possible? And you could come. Some people believe in life after death from a purely faith-based perspective, their religion and so forth. We approach it uh, more towards science and spirituality. And the way I would define spirituality is that it's the same as religion, but without the rules, and so forth. So the organization is a combination of the two things, science and spirituality.
Firstly, my heart goes to your daughter and your son. I hope he's doing fine today. My heart goes out to them. And I also like to dive to your books, Mr. Bob, The Medium Explosion and My Life Here and There. Can you please, Mr. Bob, discuss more on those books, and if you are planning to write any book in the coming future, Mr. Bob?
Yeah, well, the first book is, the Medium Explosion. I wrote, you know, w- w- I've been conducting a medium certification, program for since 2015. Um, I'm sorry, since 2005. Um, and mediums, for those who don't know, are people that claim that they can communicate with discarnate entities, people, the deceased, people in the spirit realm. And what I found over the many, many years is that 85 to 90% of all the practicing mediums out there in the world today cannot do what they claim. They have some intuitive ability, but we all have some intuitive ability, but not to the level where they can communicate. And it's a problem because these people tomorrow I can open up a storefront and say, Bob, the medium, start charging people, a lot of money. There are no regulatory bodies, there are no proficiency guidelines, no ethical guidelines, no continuing education and licensing. So, and then yet these people are meeting with people that are in deep grief. So if you're teetering whether or not in your opinion about whether or not there is life after death, and you go to a medium and the medium is terrible and doesn't give you any information, you walk out of there in worse shape than when you came. So, there's a proliferation of mediums out there, mainly because of the media. A lot of the mediums have become famous, and I want to be like so and so. And I wanted to point out that um, explain it all and what people should look out for and what they, should say and not say. And my purpose in writing the book was not to disparage, mediumship. I just wanted to show that the 10% or 15% of the mediums that really can do what they claim are extraordinary, and provide a great amount of evidence. So the book is pretty much everything involving the world of mediumship. The second book was more of the first part of the book is an autobiography. And, I've lived a pretty interesting life. So going back to in my 73 years, but the second part of the book, I won't give it away, but the second part of the book it becomes fictional and is, concerning, the afterlife. Um, my next book is going to be a novel. Writing a novel is very difficult, so it's been taking a while.
Completely agree. It's definitely always difficult, Mr. Bob. I'm so glad that you're having a book coming on in the coming future. And I also like to dive to the point of deathbed vision. When people hear about deathbed vision, they'll be like, deathbed vision. What do you think deathbed vision is? So I would like to help us to explain, Mr. Bob. What do you think are deathbed vision? And how do you think they differ from hallucination, like how do you think they differ from dreams? Mr. Bob.
Okay. So what happens in a deathbed vision is one name. A lot of people call it end of life experience. And what happens is in that window before physical death, it could be 2 weeks before, it could be right, a day before or an hour before. Many people, all of a sudden, even though they're not communicative at all, they're in, a bad shape, all of a sudden, open their eyes and most of them reach out, they extend their arms and it's clear that they're talking to somebody. Now, the others in the room usually cannot see who they're talking to, but their face, they have a big smile on their face. Lots of times they're talking to their deceased mom. Um, and um, and they're very hopeful and enlightened and and happy about this reunion. And if you talk to people that work in hospice, you'll learn that this is so common. As a matter of fact, that's how they know when somebody is getting ready to pass, when they have this vision. And the implication is that we all have assistance when it's our time to cross over, as they say. As people come, usually our loved ones, to sort of provide an escort to the other side. So, many times the people that have these visions, they're not getting any medicine, they're not getting any drugs. Uh, they were usually a lot of them because of either mental or physical limitations weren't able to talk or communicate. But yet, they're lighting up and they're having a lucid discussion, with these loved ones. So that's what we call, an end of life experience or a deathbed vision. Now, you mentioned dreams. Um, a lot of us, of course, we dream all the time, and most dreams are usually disjointed, right? That they're all over the place. They don't make any sense, and it's usually a rehashing of the previous day's activities or things that have been in your subconscious mind. And then people report what we call a dream visitation, and that's where a discarnate, somebody that's deceased and in the spirit world, comes through. It usually happens while you're in a dream state because your chatter mind is at rest. You're not thinking about all the other things, and there's a conduit to get through. Now, people describe these visitations totally different than what's so-called regular dream, because in these visitations, they see a loved one, they could talk to them, they could hug them, they could kiss them. And it's as if that person was right in front of them. And unlike a regular dream where you forget them as soon as you wake up, you don't forget these dreams. They could stay with you for decades, because they're so, amazing. And they're tremendously helpful in the grief process when you're lucky enough to get a visitation because, it's your own personal proof that they still exist, in some form. So that's how I would answer that. Uh, Near-death experiences that a lot of medical doctors have been studying for decades now are also very evidential because they here are patients who meet every definition that medical science has for death. They have no brain waves, they have no heartbeat, they have no respiration, they have no reflexes, they're dead. And yet, those that are able to be resuscitated report these clear and lucid things, and certain things are common. The same, not all near-death experiences have the same, tell us about the same thing, but there are things like moving into a light, a place of beauty, being greeted by deceased loved ones, um, being outside of their body. So when they're resuscitated, they can tell you everything that went on in the operating room, and there have been cases where people are blind, they've been sightless since birth, and yet when they're out of their body, they're able to see colors and movement, and they're able to see.
Yeah,
So it shows that our consciousness separates. This physical body is just a shell. Our
sure.
real essence is our mind and our consciousness. And that's not dependent on the physical body. It can act independently. That's why things like the power of prayer, or, reading somebody's mind or remote viewing, all these things take place, which shouldn't be possible if our brains were us and our brains were in our skull.
Completely agree. What's even caught me the most is people who have this vision most of the time, and people who maybe probably are close to death, is very, very massive. So some people might even know that they might have want to, leave this world. Some people might have had this mind that it's like I'm going to leave this world soon. Since I'm seeing this type of vision, it's very, very powerful. And I would like to know if this type of people who see this vision, I've always lastly have the fear of death. Most of the people in the world fears death. Anybody who hear death like this, they'll just want to be like, hey, death, I don't want to go to death point. But people who experience these visions, do they tend to have less fear over death, Mr. Bob?
Yes, and it's an excellent point because they totally lose their fear of death, because they see their loved ones, they know they're going to join them again, and a lot of them are kind of racked with pain, and they look forward to this world, without a body. Near-death experiences, when they return, most of them totally change their lives, because they've seen the other side and they realize that all these material things mean nothing. They enter a world of, of beauty and understanding and love and compassion. And they are angry when they're resuscitated because now they're back in that the physical pain and in this world. And they find it very difficult to navigate their lives after that because they've already seen what comes next. So anybody that's had a near-death experience, they know that they will, this physical existence is just a blip in the continuum. So they don't fear, death at all. I myself, you know, as a young adult, I had a tremendous fear of death. I mean, I was really, a lot of people do. I mean, the thought of being extinguished forever. I mean, I just couldn't imagine that. Like what's the purpose if we're just, gone? Nothing made sense. But after studying and learning and all that stuff, now I don't have a fear of death either. It took a long time. I mean, for me,
Mm.
I was studying this stuff for 7 years before I relented under the weight of the evidence. I would fight it and give alternative explanations, but um, the bottom line is it's easy to dismiss any one of these things that we're talking about, but when you step back and you look at it as a whole, the only thing that makes the most sense is that, we do survive death, when you look at the totality of the evidence.
Completely agree. We do survive death at times. Thank you so much, Mr. Bob. And I would also like to dive to the point of probably ways that could be possible for someone to prepare for death, either mentally or spiritually. If there is any way, Mr. Bob, what do you think are some ways you think one can prepare for death, mentally or spiritually, Mr. Bob?
Well, in the easiest way to put it is that if this other side, as we believe, is there's no ego, there's no greed.
Yes.
We communicate telepathically. We don't have physical bodies, so it's mind to mind communication. So if there's no greed and there's no quest for power and there's no material things, there's no incentive to lie or deceive because everybody pretty much can read your thoughts. We're open books, So, by living our physical life in that way, with a little bit more love and compassion and understanding, in essence, we're preparing, for the next world. Plus the fact, if you're not crippled by fear of death, it will enable you to live your life more fully because you're not making every decision, oh, this and that. You're not obsessed with staying, young forever. And
Exactly.
life can take on more meaning. But, I think that I try to live every day as if it was my last. I mean, I don't plan. I take everything. If something needs to be said, I say it. If I need to tell somebody I love them, I tell them because afterwards, it's a different story. So, but by living that way, I think that's the way that we prepare for the other side. Also, if we believe that we're going to continue on, now
Mm,
just think about it. So we physically die and we open our eyes and we see we're not dead, we still exist. That must be a bit confusing, especially if you didn't believe in life after death. So there must be a period of adjustment and getting used to this new world because you're kind of shocked that you're still, So I think those who are convinced that they're going to another place may have an easier transition, and get right into it because it's not a shock to them.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bob. And I do not know, Mr. Bob, if if you've had some memorable vision like that, or if you've had some profound mission visions like that, Mr. Bob, or if you've encountered someone that very close to you that has had this type of visions. So, what do you think are the most profound vision, memorable vision, that story that you think you've encountered, or someone that you think is close to you have encountered, if you've not encountered, Mr. Bob?
Well, those dream visitations can be very powerful. I mean, the reason, what I didn't tell you is that the reason that started me on this journey is that my wife, on the morning of the day that my kids were involved in the accident, woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning and she was shaking and trembling and she was just staring. And I said, "What's the matter?" And she just couldn't even talk. And I said, "What's the matter?" And she said, "Something horrible is going to happen today." And I said, "Well, what does that mean? I mean, do you have any details? Can you tell me more?" And she said, "All I can say is that our lives are going to be changed forever today." So, um, after the accident, obviously, and with my son being in the hospital, I mean, I was in shock. But when it became clear that my son was going to survive, I remembered that morning. I said, "Wait a second, how did my wife know?" She knew. I mean, she was, and so she had you can call it a vision, you can call it a precognitive um, episode, I mean, where people can see the future or one possible, future. Um, and it's real. Now, of course, I was tremendously troubled by if she only had more specifics, that maybe I could have, prevented it. But the most powerful things are those visitations, or of course a near-death experience. Also, in mediumship, if you get a reading with a medium and the medium gives you very, very specific, obscure information communicated from your loved one, information that the medium couldn't possibly have known or researched or Googled, I mean, and you walk away from that, what could give you more hope and comfort than knowing that your loved one still survives? They're not dead, they don't grieve. We grieve because we're in the physical world. So these are, what we call transformative experiences. And if you have a look, if you believe in an afterlife, one, maybe you believe from, as we mentioned, in blind faith, or two, maybe as the path I took, the research led you to that belief, or three, you had a personal transformative experience. And I think the latter is the most powerful because you didn't read about it in a book. It didn't come from a third party. It was directly to you. The most interesting thing is many years ago, I did a survey where I asked people in our foundation, given the choice, would they rather communicate with their deceased loved one directly or through a medium? Now, I thought for sure that the overwhelming majority would say, I'd rather get the direct, communication. But what I found was that it was the opposite. Most people said they'd rather contact their loved one through a medium. And I found that puzzling. So when I started to probe, there were two reasons. One, there's that fear that we were talking about. A lot of people are brought up with this fear of the unknown. And they thought that there was something fearful about communicating, directly with the dead. And two, a lot of people felt that if they got a communication directly, that maybe they were imagining it, maybe they agree it was their grief talking. Whereas if they got it through a professional, so to speak, a third party, they would believe that information. But either way, that can be, transformative. And those dream visitations, I mean, I've seen people where, they've really flipped their beliefs and lived a better life just by having a visitation like that. Not everybody gets one, but if you do, that could be very powerful.
Completely agree, Mr. Bob. It's definitely not easy. And what really shocked me the most was when you said your wife was like shivering. She was like saying something is going to happen. And that also reminded me with my grandma last year. I was definitely surprised. She was like, she wants everybody to celebrate a birthday for her. During December, that was her birthday. So she was like, she insisted that let us have a birthday. Let her have a birthday. Celebrate birthday. I want to see every single person together. And unfortunately, she died last Saturday. So those things are really, really powerful. Just as if she knows that she is, living soon, just as if. So it's really, really powerful. And I want to, there's a question I normally ask Mr. Bob. From the ancestors, from the forefathers, there are a lot of things that do exist during our forefathers' time, during our fathers who have passed on during the historic time, that is missing in our time today. If there is anyone or anything you would like to bring back to our time today, what do you think that thing would be, Mr. Bob?
Well, it raises a lot of questions. Like to those on the other side, are they aware of what goes on in our life, or do they have the ability or the power to change things? And because certainly we need a lot of help. Just look around us. But um, go back in time, and our ancestors knew all the things that we're talking about. A matter of fact, most of the founders of today's modern day religions came from these age of mysticism. They regularly commune with their ancestors.
Mm,
People there would have been tribal communities that based their daily activities based on their dreams, and visitations. This was normal, back then, but now, it's taken. We'll be better if we can go back to what our ancestors did. It sounds ridiculous, thousands of years later, but we're no better off in a lot of respects, and they knew. So I don't think that our ancestors see. Um, First of all, I don't think that they have ability to change things on a macro level. In other words, they can't prevent wars. They can't prevent diseases and pestilence and things like that. They can try to influence us individually and urge us the right way. Just like uh, I believe that my wife was getting a message, from the other side. It wasn't so much that she was seeing the future. Somebody was sending her, a
Message.
message. So they can try to improve our lives and give us warnings and so forth individually. But I don't think that they can change the course of events that way. And um, it's a very difficult concept. And imparting wisdom. Well, we have to realize that it's not. They realize that, like I said, this is just a little blip, and we're going to be with them, real quick, and possibly, maybe they don't feel the same urgency as us. Maybe they look at it as a lesson that we're learning. And which raises other possibilities about whether people believe in reincarnation or not. But that evidence, seems real too, that we come back by choice. To live a life again, the thing that always troubled me was, why would somebody choose to come back to a life of poverty or hunger, or physical, why? Why would somebody do that? But we're looking at it like at a human level, on a soul level. Maybe there's this great oversoul and it's made up of many different lifetimes, and we need to complete the picture, complete certain things. And we come back and we may not always know what we're here to learn, but on a greater level, we do. You know, there's a statement I once read by one of the world's great shamans, and he said, being in this physical life is like being at a football game. He said, when you have seats ground level, you can hear the sounds and the impacts and see all the violence and the chaos. But it's not until you move to the very, very top row of the stadium that you can see all the patterns. And that may be how we can't recognize the patterns while we're here, but from a different perspective, we can see the reasons for things.
Completely agree. And what really hurts me is no one can just change that event. It's just definitely going to happen. We could have the hint, but we can't do anything about it. It's definitely not easy. I want to sincerely thank you, Mr. Bob, for the opportunity for speaking on this death vision and this afterlife that we have today. Thank you so much, Mr. Bob.
You're welcome. My
All right,
pleasure
man.
being with you.
Have a wonderful day, Mr. Bob. Bye bye.
Bye bye.